In the latter half of the 15th century, Brandenburg would cement its role as the undisputed power of North Germany, and one of the players on the stage of the Holy Roman Empire and Europe. In 1477, Johann found his nation at peace after defeating and annexing Stettin into his nation, and now reigned over Pomerania united under him. Johann and his diplomatic council were contemplating the logistics of securing Johann's place on the Burgundian throne. While his nobles thought Johann was dreaming, being too ambitious and, putting it more bluntly, naive, but Johann wasn't naive. He was confident in his knowledge, and knew that there was a good chance that he could secure himself on the Burgundian throne. Despite the previous conflict between the two nations, they were very amicable with each other. So Johann formed a political alliance between the two states, and arranged a marriage between Marie, the Duke of Burgundy's daughter, and one of Johann's younger sons, though this marriage wouldn't come into effect until after Duke Charles's death. In 1478, Johann issued a controversial decree known as the State Piety Act. One of the major points of this decree would be declaring religion as the foremost priority of the administration. The bishops of Brandenburg weren't content with this decree, because they had to divert a lot of their resources to assist running the state, and had a lot of new responsibilities in administration. Though this act would seemingly make the clergy have strong ties in the government, it was the first of many decisions that would cause rising tensions between the Catholic clergy of Brandenburg and the government. The First Eastern Expedition, or the War of Luneburg for short, would be Johann's first war of a long military career both in the East, the very East, and elsewhere. Johann declared war on the Duchy of Luneburg. The city-state of Anhalt and the Duchy of Brunswick answered the call, but were no match to Johann's army. Luneburg was fully occupied, and Johann caught the resistance army trying to relieve Anhalt. All were defeated except the army of Luneburg, which cowardly fled the battlefield. Anhalt and Brunswick were forced to give up portions of their treasury and trade, and Luneburg was fully integrated. While Johann was at peace, investing in the military development of his lands in Prussia, and constructing a strong economy, the French declared war on Burgundy. Johann answered the call with no hesitance, despite the French being much stronger. His army bravely joined the defense of Burgundy, and even captured Paris for some time, though Johann concluded the war to be inevitably unwinnable, so he ordered his army to stay put in Brandenburg. The French attempted to invade on numerous occasions, but Johann's army never disappointed in driving away the invaders. Duke Charles of Burgundy eventually sued for peace, and conceded much of his land to the French. Johann, despite knowing its inevitability, was upset. However, Johann's fury would reach high levels when he learned that the French king had died without an heir, and that the Castilian king had now been crowned as the King of France. The Spanish were now the greatest power in Europe and the world, and Johann knew that no one would be able to oppose the Castilians and restore the balance of power in Europe. He had to step up and contest the Spanish supremacy of Europe. This task would be impossible for any typical ruler, but that was not Johann. He had driving ambition and uncompromising willpower. The Second Eastern Expedition would be fought by Johann and the states of Verden, Dithmarschen, Saxe-Lauenburg, and Bremen. Johann moved to siege Verden, and the states attempting to defend Verden paid for standing in Johann's way. The resistance gathered their forces and couldn't make a decision on where to go, so stayed put in occupied Altmark. Johann was decisive and made quick work of these city-states. Bremen was the first to fall, followed by Saxe-Lauenburg and Dithmarschen. Saxe-Lauenburg and Verden were fully incorporated under Johann's sovereignty. In the spring of 1498, Austria declared war on Bohemia and called Johann to arms. He reluctantly accepted, due to Austria wanting to install themselves on the Bohemian throne. But Johann contributed to the war effort due to his rivalry with the Bohemians, making quick work of Mecklenburg and Brunswick, who were aligned with the Bohemians. Johann also had his army loot and plunder the countryside, making for a profitable war. By the end of the conflict, Austria had retracted their claim on the Bohemian throne, and simply conquered a few Moravian provinces. But during the war, on the 21st of May, 1499, it happened. What his state had been hoping for in the past decades. The Burgundian Duke Charles passed away, and though he named his son as heir, everyone, including his son, knew that his succession was improbable. The Burgundian nobles refused to crown him, instead offering the crown to Charles's eldest daughter, Marie. Marie had been arranged to marry one of Johann's younger sons 20 years ago, and the marriage had only come into effect just a week after Charles's death. Marie voluntarily passed the title to her father-in-law Johann. The Burgundian nobles welcomed Johann's ascension, as they saw him as the most legitimate successor to Charles. But Johann's new duchy wasn't without contest. The Austrians, using their title as Holy Roman Emperor, called an imperial diet of all states in the Holy Roman Empire on the matter of Burgundy. The majority vote, including the Holy Roman Emperor, voted to demand Johann release the lowlands. Johann refused to do this, and the Austrians, not wanting to escalate the matter with their close ally, dropped the matter, a wise decision on their end. But Johann didn't know this. He wasn't certain that the Austrians would choose him over the lowlands, so he raised a large army from his reserves, of which he had plenty from a strong Prussian military infrastructure. His army swelled to 30,000 men. With the glory and size of his state, Johann officially replaced his title of Margrave with King. He was now the second king in the Holy Roman Empire, challenging Bohemia. Johann was now the King Elector of Brandenburg and the Duke of Burgundy. Though this decade saw no military conflict, these years saw the greatest change in the state of Brandenburg. The first came in the summer of 1506, when Johann learned of a Norwegian monk who had publicly and severely criticized the Pope. While the Catholics of Europe were shocked, Johann was intrigued and unsurprised to learn that the monk had convinced the majority of his hometown to abandon Catholicism. The monk's teachings and criticisms of the Pope would branch away and form a new denomination of Christianity known as Protestantism. Johann had talked with the Bishop of Berlin about this heresy, and both were convinced. The two of them formed a plot within the clergy to expel Catholicism and proclaim Protestantism as the state religion of Brandenburg. In secret, both Johann and the bishop went one by one finding and converting members of the clergy to Protestantism, and growing the conspiracy. On the morning of October 1st, 1507, Johann arrested every Catholic member of the clergy. Johann would publicly convert to Protestantism later that evening and proclaim it as the new state religion of Brandenburg. The Burgundians were skeptical, as well as Johann's allies, but he used his reputation and was able to convince both his allies and subjects to tolerate his heresy. The merchants and nobles welcomed this change as it benefited their desires of gold and glory. Many persecuted Protestant theologians fled persecution and arrived in the safety of Johann's court. The common people were initially upset, but the Bishop of Berlin spent 4 hours a night and translated the entirety of the Bible from Latin to German in just 2 weeks. This new Berlin Bible would rapidly spread throughout both Johann's state and beyond, and within just 5 years, half of the population had embraced Protestantism. On Christmas Day 1515, after a rapid shift in cultural, religious, and national aspects and a little resistance, Johann officially abolished the Kingdom of Brandenburg and established the Kingdom of Prussia. This change could have been seen years in advance, as the identity of the state had been changing on all aspects, and Johann would use his new identity, as well as his new church, to further Prussian interests in the region. And thus, on October 2nd, 1517, Johann would declare his first war as the King of Prussia. Initially, he intended to conquer northern Silesia and the state of Mecklenburg, though he broadened his goal later on and acquired Oldenburg as a subject. The Prussians were superior in numbers and quality, and quickly occupied Mecklenburg and Bohemia within a matter of months. The Prussians proved their newfound military strength in their first major battles, Zollerick and Königsberg. The first of these, Zollerick, were fought between a 17,000-strong Prussian army against 7,000 Bohemians. All 7,000 Bohemians were either killed or captured, while the Prussians lost less than 1,000 men. In October 1518, after extensive military occupation, Mecklenburg was incorporated into the Prussian state, and in November of the next year, Oldenburg as a vassal. In January 1520, the Treaty of Prague would leave the Prussians gloriously victorious. Bohemia paid large sums of their money to Prussia, which Johann used to pay off the war debt. Bohemia was humiliated, and Johann annexed northern Silesia. Johann's growth was quite rapid, having annexed Mecklenburg, subjugating Oldenburg, and taking this new chunk out of Bohemia. He originally desired the lands directly south of him, but he avoided it out of fear of a German coalition forming due to his aggressive growth. In 1518, a French Protestant theologian fled France out of fear of Catholic persecution. He arrived in the safe haven of Brandenburg and resided in the city of Uckermark. His name was John Calvin. In 1520, he published a written work detailing his beliefs, which differed from both Catholic and Protestant teachings. The Prussian state had harbored all heresies opposed to Catholicism, but Calvin's teachings were deviant relative to Protestantism. The Protestant clergy of Prussia were upset, and infuriated that the people of Berlin quickly adopted the teachings of Calvin. Throughout the years, tensions between the Protestants and Calvin's followers would increase, which would eventually evolve into the Reformed Church. Another big event during this time would be the sudden and unexpected death of Marie on May 31st, 1522. She passed away to a horse-riding accident in the company of her Hohenzollern husband. She served as the governor and representative of Burgundy before her death, and now that she was gone, the Burgundian nobles had no option but to answer directly to Johann. The nobles of Burgundy and Brandenburg were integrated into one class and now united under one king. Though Prussian rule over Burgundy wasn't without contest, in March 1523, the Dutch under Prussian rule revolted. At first it was a rebellion, but the conflict escalated, and the Dutch declared independence, breaking away from Prussian Burgundy. Prussia convinced its allies to join, as this was technically a defensive war. During the course of the war, the Prussian army occupied all of the Netherlands, though many Dutch nations would join as provinces of the Netherlands. By early 1525, all of the Netherlands, including the provinces that joined, were under Prussian occupation, though the Dutch navy was strong and dominated the weaker Prussian navy oriented for inland sea combat and trade. After years of Prussian occupation, the Dutch agreed to concede most of Prussia's original land. While the Dutch state lived on in the provinces that joined during the revolt, Johann agreed to peace with the Dutch, returning most of Prussia's rightful possessions, though a lot of Germany considered this to be Prussian aggression. In the period after the Dutch revolt, Prussia found itself allied with the Ottoman Empire. Though the Austrians opposed this alliance, the Prussians greatly welcomed this, especially to counter the Western European powerhouses of Castile, France, and England. On June 1527, the violence between Protestants and Reformed boiled over. Violence between the two groups were common, though Johann decreed an edict for religious tolerance. This did little to bring peace between the two faiths, and religious violence would continue throughout the years. Johann would attempt to decree a second edict later in his life, but only time could tell if this would be just words, or if the difference between the two groups could be resolved. During this time, Johann's wife Margaret passed away of old age. Johann was devastated, but he would have to persevere through his personal pain to bring Prussia to greatness. To add further chaos to Prussia's plate, the Great Peasants' War was sweeping Europe. Peasants throughout the Holy Roman Empire and beyond began to overthrow their nobles and began demanding concessions from their rulers. While the Prussian peasants didn't attempt to overthrow their nobles during Johann's reign, the ideals of freedom and rights increased unrest and chaos throughout the Prussian state. Johann Cicero wouldn't live to see it though. After a whole 50 years of ruling his nation, he passed away on February 18th, 1531. He died of old age. Upon his death, his 56-year-old heir and nephew, also named Johann, would be coronated as the second king of Prussia. The future chroniclers of Prussia would differentiate between the two rulers by referring to the elder as Johann Cicero, his full name, and his nephew as Johann IV. He declared 14 days of mourning for his uncle, and honored his lengthy reign as he saw and guided his nation through many events. Starting with the conquest of Stettin, Johann Cicero saw the electorate of Brandenburg conquer the east, officially become a kingdom, form the Prussian state, inherit and subjugate Burgundy, as well as guiding his nation through the Protestant Reformation, the Calvinist Heresy, the Dutch Revolt, and the beginnings of both the Prussian religious turmoil and the Great Peasants' War. Now, will Johann IV be able to uphold his uncle's legacy, sailing Prussia through the waves of crises he found his state in, or will Prussia fall to the books of history?